you ever experienced that twitchy feeling whilst riding on your triathlon bike in the wind? Yeah, it can be pretty unnerving, and it can actually lead to people fearing going out on their triathlon bike on a windy day.
Yeah, well, we're in the perfect place for wind today, Lanzarote, and we're going to help you with your confidence when riding in the wind, as well as talk you through how to make the most of the wind.
Battling the wind can be exhausting, not just physically fighting the wind resistance, but fighting to keep your bike on track constantly. It can be mentally and physically draining.
So the answer, we're going to become one with the wind. Whoa! Oh, no, not really. I'm only joking. But really, it is actually really important that we do learn how to ride in the wind if we want to improve our bike times, as well as being able to have enough energy to run off the bike well.
Yeah, so first, let's look at the different wind directions.
We all know these too well, and some days it just seems like the wind gods are against us. Now in science terms, a perfectly pure headwind is what we refer to as a yaw angle of 0 degrees. Now despite these obviously being pretty hard going at times, a perfectly pure headwind shouldn't give us too much of an issue. But as we all know, a perfectly pure headwind is pretty rare.
No, we have crosswinds or side winds. These winds with a greater yaw angle, and these are the winds that stir up the most fear. Interestingly though, a faster rider traveling in the same direction in the same conditions will experience these crosswinds more head-on than a slower rider, albeit with slightly more force. Anyway, it's these crosswinds which we'll be focusing on the most today. But there is one more.
Woohoo! And tailwinds! Need I say much more? Well, actually, yeah. I mean, should you ride harder when you got a tailwind and make the most out of it, or ride harder when you're going into a headwind? Well, stay tuned. We'll be explaining more later on.
So before we get to that, let's help you deal with the wind better. And I'd like to start by taking a look at your bike. Don't worry, I'm not going to ask you to buy a whole new bike or even new equipment, but it's worthwhile taking a look at your setup to see if you can optimize anything. Have you installed an aero bottle between your bars or a large bento box? These things are great, but maybe they could be positioned somewhere better or changed for something else to make you feel a bit more stable in those crosswinds. The higher up they're mounted on your bike, the more they're going to affect your stability in a crosswind. So see if you can mount them a little lower and you'll have less of effect in those crosswinds.
And then of course there's the position. Now one of the main reasons that many people feel uneasy on a triathlon or time trial bike in the wind is due to their position. Now obviously we are using the aero bar, so more of our weight is on the front end of the bike, and that can affect the handling and at times make it feel a little bit twitchy. Of course, being aero will help considerably in the wind. Essentially, the smaller your frontal area, the smaller the object you're trying to punch through the air. But finding the balance between being aerodynamic but also not having excessive weight over the front end of the bike is incredibly difficult. And let's not forget being able to put out power in that position. So bear that in mind when tweaking your own position, or better, have an expert take a look.
Now let's discuss wheels. Deep wheels and wind, everyone's favorite discussion, especially in the days leading up to a race where there may be crosswinds. Deep wheels definitely have a performance advantage on race day, but they can be a bit of a handful if there's going to be strong crosswinds. This handling can be practiced with time, but if you're a little bit underconfident, maybe the deep wheels are best left for the time being. That said, modern wheels are designed to interact incredibly well with crosswinds. In fact, with many, as the yaw angles increase, the angle the wind is coming at, the drag decreases. The deeper profile of wheels actually help to smooth out the flow of air, to the point that they can create a sail-like effect. In other words, the wind can push the bike forwards. Also, the wheels are the lowest point on the bike, so they don't really catch the wind as much or push you off course as much because they're so low. So while I'm not actually saying you should all go and ride discs tomorrow, they do get a bit of a bad rep as being hard to handle, when they're actually very good at smoothing and controlling the airflow around your bike and leaving less turbulence in your wake.
Now, something we commonly see when someone's struggling into a headwind is they start grinding their gears. Now, in the same way that as you hit a climb, you may shift down to some easier gears, just do the same into the headwind, essentially, or in short, you're trying to keep your cadence the same, whether you're cycling with no wind, into a headwind, or into a tailwind. And actually, by doing so, it may mean that you stay more relaxed in your upper body when you're in the aero bars, therefore reducing your frontal area, you're making yourself more aerodynamic, and just generally saving more energy.
Okay, so back to the power usage question. Is it better to make the most of a tailwind and push harder in the tailwind, or push harder with a headwind?
Yeah, this debate has existed for years, but the best bit of advice I was ever given was that it's not the person that goes the fastest that wins, but the person that slows down the least. In other words, it's better to keep your average speed up throughout rather than peaking in some sections and stalling in others.
But then, isn't it best to make the most of a tailwind? Well, yes, absolutely you want to make the most of a tailwind, but only so much as your normal power allows you to. There's no point in adding an extra 100 watts to go 5 kilometers an hour faster, even though it might feel great, when all you're using that 100 watts for is to overcome air resistance.
Yeah, however, on a climb, for example, to increase your speed from 15 kilometers an hour to 20 kilometers an hour, that same 5 kilometer increase in speed, it may only require 50 watts of extra power, because at this comparatively slower speed, you're actually overcoming less air resistance or less drag. So in order to achieve a higher average speed throughout your ride, it actually makes sense in some ways to go hardest when you're going your slowest.
That's right. Well, we hope this video's shed some light on how to deal with the wind when you're cycling your bike. If it has, give it a thumbs up, and don't forget to subscribe to GTN for more videos like this about cycling and about all things triathlon.